Mary Mallon, better known as Typhoid Mary, was the first person in the United States identified as an asymptomatic carrier of the pathogen associated with typhoid fever. She was presumed to have infected 51 people, 3 of whom died over the course of her career as a cook. She was twice forcibly isolated by public health authorities and died after a total of nearly 3 decades in isolation. From 1900 to 1907, Mallon worked as a cook in the New York City area for 7 families. In 1900, she worked in Mamaroneck, New York, where, within 2 weeks of her employment, residents developed typhoid fever. In 1901, she moved to Manhattan, where members of the family for whom she worked developed fevers and diarrhea, and the laundress died. Mallon then went to work for a lawyer. She left after 7 of the 8 people in that household became ill. In 1906, she took a position in Oyster Bay, Long Island, and within 2 weeks, 10 of the 11 family members were hospitalized with typhoid. She changed jobs again, and similar occurrences happened in 3 more households. She worked as a cook for the family of a wealthy New York banker, Charles Henry Warren. When the Warrens rented a house in Oyster Bay for the summer of 1906, Mallon went along too. From August 27th to September 3rd, 6 of the 11 people in the family came down with typhoid fever. The disease at the time was unusual in Oyster Bay, according to 3 medical doctors who practiced there.
I'm 43 years old and I owe tens of thousands of dollars in student loans. Oh, sure, I knew the loans were piling up as I went through school. But with one loan coming from here, another from there, I had no idea of the rock slide that was building. 15 years later, I still experience moments of sheer horror regarding my family's financial situation. My monthly student loan payment is more than triple my car payment. Okay, so without my college degree, I would not have been able to get my current job. For that I'm grateful, but at what cost? My loans have been accruing at a rate of 10%, and now they have burgeoned to, well, I'm an English major, you do the math. I don't think they'll ever get paid off. We're in debt way past our eyeballs, and there's no hope in sight. I'm being kept in class, a financial class of graduates whose only hope for attending college meant borrowing money from the government. Because of our mounting credit card debt and monthly payments that far exceed our family's income, my kids will also join the class of citizens who can't rely on their parents for college support. Do I wish I'd chosen another educational route? You bet. Perhaps trade school. I thought that being a plumber might not be such a bad gig. But if your job aspirations require a 4-year degree, take my advice and choose a college you can afford both during and after graduation. Take a realistic look at your anticipated income and factor in priorities that don't carry a price, like the spouse and children you might want to have someday. I was overconfident that my student loan debt would pale in comparison to the lucrative writing career I'd enjoy after graduation. Now I'm paying for that decision in more ways than I'd ever imagined.
There are a lot of people talking about globalization, many of whom have strong and often conflicting views about the subject. Some authors see globalization as a rather positive thing in the meaning of the consumer society and benefit to shoppers of more things to buy and services to get in Western world. Other authors and many non-governmental organizations, like Third World Network, are much more critical, seeing globalization as colonization of the developing world. Globalization is seen as a complicated process, focusing on how events, decisions, and activities in one part of the world can have consequences in other parts of the world. Leon Collins, 2004, 4. There are different definitions of globalization. Globalization is increasing interdependence of national economies in trade, finance, and macroeconomic policy. Globalization is diffusion of practices, values, and technology that have an influence on people's lives worldwide. A recognition of social geography marked by the growth of transplanetary and supraterritorial connections between people. The trend has unfolded at greatest speeds, on greatest scales, to greatest extents, and with greatest impacts since the middle of the 20th century. Globalization is a process fueled and resulting in increasing cross-border flows of goods, services, money, people, information, and culture.
I don't know why that was taught in medical school, but it was considered to be a fat-soluble vitamin and therefore stored in the body, and it would act for a long period of time and it would build up and you get into trouble. But now, in recent years, when we've had the technology to measure fat content of vitamin D, we find there's not much there. And the reason there's not much there is there's not much coming into the diet, or we are avoiding sun. So we have less vitamin D, and therefore our fat tissue does too. It's not stored up there in high concentrations. You don't begin to store vitamin D in fat until you begin to build it up in the serum, and that doesn't occur until you already have relatively high 25-hydroxy-D values. Now, it's at this point you begin to accumulate fat. And if you were out here, you'd probably have a very healthy fat concentration of D, but not very many people are out there. These are studies that were done under controlled circumstances where we could control how much was coming in and what the concentrations were under the circumstances. But the one thing students seem to recall is that fat-soluble vitamins can produce intoxication, therefore you have to be careful.
I had been writing nonfiction for years, actually, but secretly wanting to be a novelist. When I first started writing at the age of 30, it was with the intention of writing fiction. But I took a little detour for 10 or 12 years and wrote nonfiction, which I have absolutely no regret about at all. I think it was exactly the right thing for me to do. But there was that dream tucked away inside of me to do this. And I remember reading something that Eudora Welty wrote, who is, the great novelist from Mississippi who had a big influence on me, actually. She said, "No art ever came out of not risking your neck." And I think she's absolutely right about that. It felt that way to me at the time, and actually it feels that way to me every time I sit down to write something. Finally, in the early 90s, I took my deep breath and started writing fiction. It felt risky to me at the time to do that. And one of the very first things that I wrote was what I thought was going to be the first chapter of a novel called The Secret Life of Bees. I wrote it in 1992, and it is actually essentially the first chapter of the novel as it is now.